All right, welcome everyone.
Hello, Matt. What a wonderful start.
Hello, hello, Kafkas. Hello, Edward. How are you?
Good. Very good. Okay. So, Matt, say a few words about this unusual beginning.
Yes, I do. Yeah, this was suggested by Ed, and for those who may not know, Ed is not only a adroit geopolitical analyst, but a composer. And a couple of years back, when the fires of war were heating up on the Ukraine front, he composed what we just saw there, featuring at first a digital recording of an original Waltz for Peace, followed by a live performance featuring a real small orchestra. But we're living in a moment right now where I think really uh, humanity is on the line, and there are some deep, soul-searching, existential questions that are being
Mhm.
pressed upon us. And I think that this was a perfect way to begin today's presentation, where we will have some very important geopolitical considerations by Alex Krainer, Drago Bosnic, Ed, and of course Jim Jatras, who is here in a certain original way, which we'll begin with. Ed, I would you like to say a few words to open with, or should we jump straight into the presentations?
I just simply want to add that, yes, I compose the music, but all this video was prepared by Matt. So this is a joint venture. He did all the work, assembling all those beautiful videos and with music, and I think it's just appropriate to show it today, a few minutes of your time. Well, let's start and see what our experts are going to say.
So for our first expert, do you think we should begin with Jim Jatras?
Yes, let's do that. Just I want to say that Jim Jatras is a good friend of mine. I knew him from old days when he was at the State Department. He was senior official at the State Department at the Soviet desk. Then he moved to the Senate, and he was senior advisor to Republican political committee, policy committee. So he's great experience in both State Department and congressional. Now, of course, he's retired, but he is still active. He has a big bird, like Solzhenitsyn type. You'll see him in a second. He has a lot of things to say. And let's start with Jim Jatras, and let's play our interview. Okay.
Okay. And since Jim couldn't be here with us today, we did a little pre-recording. So I hope you all enjoy, and then we'll open it up for Drago and Alex Krainer to follow up on it. All right, welcome everyone. I'm very, very happy that we are going to be pre-recording a short dialogue with Jim Jatras, a good friend of both Ed Lozansky and myself, who has been a longtime, very, very adroit geopolitical analyst, somebody who has been a U.S. diplomat, somebody also who has worked on the Senate Republican Policy Committee as an advisor, and who has a great deal of experience navigating the realm of geopolitics with a deep understanding of historical forces and human nature, which is such a high value. And recently, Ed and I watched an assessment of the world situation in the new Trump 2.0 administration, the pros and the cons in a discussion with Rachel Blevins. It was a fantastic discussion, and we just had to have Jim contribute into our Peace Roundtable forum. So, Jim, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for clarifying a few ambiguities that we're going to be jumping into today. The first question,
Matt, I'm sorry,
oh,
Matt. Thank you,
got it.
Ed, for having me on. I just want to say I can't think of two better people to have a little discussion with at this very uncertain time as the world seems to be shifting under our feet.
Well, you could say that again. Ed, I think that you had a thought or a question that you wanted to begin with. Do you want to start?
Well, everyone's using the word unpredictable with Trump, and this is correct because I was really my hopes were dramatically improved, increased after his interview on January 7th, when he was still president-elect in Mar-a-Lago, where he basically agreed that this war started because of NATO expansion. This was, I didn't expect that. So for me, it was really, I said, now we have our guy in the White House, finally, because he understands the roots of this crisis. Didn't take too much time to change the tune after he dropped elect and became real president, moved in the White House, and then things, it's this expression, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Because he almost repeated stories and blaming, of course, and threatening Russia and with sanctions. And most importantly, the people that he selected in his team, they're few. First of all, of course, Tulsi Gabbard and Robert Kennedy, who exactly said what just mentioned, what he mentioned on January 7th, but not the rest of the team. So we are now for some strange times. On one hand, we knew that we don't have anyone else by Trump, even with all his problems. Then so we have to deal with someone we have. But do we expect? Do you have a? Is any hope still remains, or this is all over again?
Things are clear as mud right now. I mean, you do hear some statements out of Trump that seem to be encouraging, and then he spouts off all sorts of nonsensical numbers like 1 million Russian dead and 60 million deaths during World War II. And you wonder, where does he get his facts from? And you hope if somebody like Tulsi Gabbard gets in, the president will be briefed a little more on what the true state of affairs is. But I think underlying this is that we really don't know what fundamental direction he wants. And we know he wants to make America great again. He wants to annex Greenland and Canada and everything else in the Western Hemisphere. But we don't really know at this point whether he wants to take America away from the unipolar moment that began in 1991, where we think we had this mission from history to dominate the entire globe, and be willing to say to other powers, whether it's the Russians or the Iranians or the Chinese, oh, that bit of land over there, it's none of our business. We don't care what goes on over there. That's in your sphere. It's not in ours. I mean, and I think some people have been very quick to jump on that and say, oh, well, he's throwing his weight around the Western Hemisphere. I guess he's going to go into a multipolar mode. I hope that's what it means. But there's a difference between saying he's doubling down on American dominance in our region and saying he's willing to concede other regions to other powers. And that's what we don't know yet. And until, I think it's going to take a little bit of time. For example, we've got these mixed reports. Has he cut off weapons to Ukraine or not? I mean, the reports are mixed. Has he cut off the money to Ukraine? The reports are mixed. So and it seems too, he's still the mentality that this is primarily a war between Ukraine and Russia, so he can get in there and knock some heads together and get these boys who are to stop fighting and come to the table because he's the teacher. He doesn't seem to fully understand this is not a war between Ukraine and Russia. This is a war between Russia and the collective West, between really the United States and NATO on the one side, using Ukraine as a proxy. So hopefully he'll start to, wake up and smell the kvass and figure out what's going on here. And maybe he really knows, and this is part of it, just the way he sets the stage and, art of the deal and all that kind of nonsense. But we really don't know at this point.
Yeah. No, I think that ambiguity is important. And, we do have his first term to go on as far as a gauge to a certain degree. And we do know that there were things that he would often say which would be inflammatory, but then he would go and do something eminently rational. Mm-hmm. Like meet with Kim Jong-un and try to broker a deal with the South and North Korea or a variety of points that there's a long list of examples. But then again, as you've pointed out, to what degree is he appreciative of the nuances, and why is he seemingly saying on the one hand that he's learned from his lessons of allowing in the Mike Pompeos, the Boltons, these war hawk neocons in the first term, that he wouldn't do again. And then he goes and does it all again. And there's all of these creatures like Mark Rubio and Pete Hegseth, who are Gorka, Sebastian, my God, yeah, British intel connected, strange figure. So we don't really fully know exactly to what degree this is wise, street smart maneuvering a la Lincoln of keep your enemies close, or is he really duped? Does he have these blind spots that could be used to create destruction? It's very jarring, eh?
Yeah, it is. And the thing is, as far as, for example, when he says something like this would not have happened, he was president. Again, he puts that into the mindset of Biden weak, me strong. Putin would never have dared to do this if I was president. And he admits, as Ed said, that NATO expansion was the cause of it. But it's more to it than that. This war, the hot phase of this war in February 2022, really picked up only about a year after Biden took office. It wasn't under Biden that Ukraine was built up into a major military power, a NATO state in all but name. That happened under Trump. I mean, he had Kurt Volker, the guy from Raytheon, as his Ukraine envoy, who just happened to think that, well, what they need is lots of Javelin missiles, which just happened to be made by which company? Oh, yeah, Raytheon. So It was as under Trump that they built up Ukraine into this force that was prepared to conduct what they call, like kind of their version of Operation Storm, like the Croatians did with the American aid in 1995 in Krainer. I don't even know if Trump knows that happened under his watch during his first administration, that the stage was set for this war. And of course, it just then kicked into force when when Biden was in office. So I don't know how much of it is muddled thinking on his part. He seems to have this conflict within his own thinking about which way he wants to go. And then you wonder how much does he actually know about what goes on in our government and what these people are up to.
Mm-hmm. On that note, he did mention something about he doesn't believe that America should even be in NATO. About 4 days ago, he made some statement that that we should be spending anything in NATO. But at the same measure, he's also encouraging all of the member states to spend upwards of 5% of their GDP. Do you think that there's anything behind this? Could NATO actually be threatened as an institution by this type of maneuver? Or do you think that this is just sort of words put out there in a discombobulated fashion?
It's one of the ironies here, because various people have pointed out that he could find various ways to start to withdraw the United States from Europe and get out of these commitments, force the Europeans to spend more, although why that's necessary, I don't know. What threat exactly do they need to spend 5% on in order for us to justify leaving? And one of the ironies is one of the president's strongest powers, in which he has almost plenary authority, is to withdraw us from treaties. If he wanted to get us out of the North Atlantic Treaty, he could more or less do that with a stroke of his pen. It would still take a year for it to take effect. But if he did that, there's almost nothing the pro-NATO types could do about it. They can't force the president to make a treaty, and they can't stop him from withdrawing from a treaty. So if he wanted to do that, he could do that. So maybe he feels politically it's necessary to take this roundabout move to do it. But I think that's the crux of the problem there, question there, Matt. Does he intend to have a multilateral world and America to pull back from these far-flung commitments where we must exercise hegemony in Europe? We must exercise hegemony in the Middle East. We must have hegemony on the Western Pacific Rim. Or does he understand that our sphere of influence is here in the Western Hemisphere, and to concentrate on defending that? I don't even know if he thinks in those terms.
Ed, do you have a thought?
Well, during his first term, we gave him a lot of excuses because we thought that he has to prove that he is not Russian agent. Mm-hmm. This is so he was doing all those bad things, and we more or less forgave him because this is we understood that all those impeachment, threats of impeachment, Russian agents, all those things, but also because some of the people in his administration were doing some bad things without even telling him. We know that, there's a recent article surprising article in New York Times saying that how CIA built all those bases in Ukraine, and this happened under Trump's watch also. So, but now no more excuses. This is the thing that, by the way, we are speaking today on the eve of tomorrow's decision by British American scientists about doomsday scenario. And now, today's 90 seconds. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. It will be interesting to get your prediction. But also, my question is, I keep my latest few articles are called homework for Keith Kellogg, because Keith Kellogg apparently he's front man. He's doing this, and he's preparing this summit. Eventually, it has to sound the sooner the better. And Kellogg needs some homework. So, what would you recommend besides our articles? Maybe you have some idea of what he should read before, to get his brains in a proper state and deliver to his message on the eve of the summit some logical think how to end this war, but to benefit all sides. I don't know whether it's possible at all, but at least some compromise.
I have a suggestion. There's this guy named Matt Ehret. He writes a lot of really great stuff. He's extremely prolific. Anything that Matt has written should be sent to Kellogg and let him figure this out. I mean, this is the same Kellogg now who seems to think, and Trump seems to think this too, that if we can somehow drive the price of oil down, get the Saudis to flood the world market with cheap oil, that somehow will drag the Russians down. Actually, this leads me to what I think is a question for Ed. What are the Russians thinking? I mean, they must be puzzled over all of this and what to expect from this administration. But I think what lurks behind that, I mean, this is what I referred to in my interview with Rachel and also the piece we were commenting on that was on the Ron Paul site last year, is that the whole Russian approach to this war seems to have been what I call pedagogical. In other words, the idea, we'll send a force in and now they'll talk. Oh, well, they won't talk now. Well, we'll keep grinding away and we'll fling a few Oreshniks in there. Have you gotten the message yet? No, they haven't got the message yet. So they seem to be constantly trying to position themselves for some deal, some diplomatic settlement with the West. And it seems that they're going out of their way to avoid ending this war through a military fait accompli. Am I wrong in my understanding of that, or am I reading the tea leaves correctly, that at some point the Russians hope against hope that somebody somewhere will be reasonable they can talk to and make a deal with, even though every deal they've made with us in the last 30 years has not been honored by their Western partners, as they insist on calling them? What's the thinking from your perspective, Ed?
Well, of course, I can speak for Russians. I can give you only my opinion. I think that they have complete, total trust in Putin. They think that he is the one who knows real picture, his all information, and they trust him. His popularity is extremely strong, despite of heavy losses. Russia is losing a lot of people, and everyone really is wondering the same as you, why Russia is not responded as promised to all those attacks from the British and American missiles. I think that probably Putin doesn't want to disrupt, because this is what Zelensky wants. Zelensky wants to provoke Russia, so Russia responds strongly against some of those countries who deliver those missiles. And then it will be a what we call Pearl Harbor moment. Every time they say we want to meet. So I think all their hope is in this meeting. That apparently at this meeting, when they look eye to eye, face to face, maybe, and they definitely are sympathetic to each other, and they can find some compromise. So at this point, Russians just have to keep their feelings under control, not to go like crazy. And although some people in the media definitely demand a strong response. The sooner this meeting takes place, the better, because otherwise every day it's one step more towards Pearl Harbor, a sort of Pearl Harbor. And we'll know tomorrow what American nuclear scientists think about it with their doomsday scenario time, whether they move errors closer to midnight or keep it in the same place. I don't know.
Well, again, this is what puzzles me a bit because, obviously if the Western leadership wants to commit worldwide suicide, kill everybody by the use of nuclear weapons, they can do that. But if it's a conventional confrontation, NATO cannot win that confrontation. And many people from like Colonel McGregor and Andrei Martyanov and many others have pointed out just on military terms, NATO is not prepared to fight this war. So I don't know why the Russians are more afraid of a Pearl Harbor confrontation than their Western partners are. And what I really don't understand is why they are still taking this incremental approach to the war. I mean, why is Zelensky and the presidential administration in Kiev still in existence? Why is the Rada still in existence? Why is the SVU still in existence? Why are the bridges still over the Dnieper so they can supply their forces in the east? And meanwhile, Russia is incrementally killing off the entire generation, or maybe two generations of Ukrainian manpower, which is actually, in some ways, a far more heartless way to go around about this, rather than destroying the Ukrainian state ability to conduct the war. I don't understand unless they're so sold on the notion that somebody's going to come and agree with them. And I'll tell you honestly, whatever Trump's preferences may be, I believe that anything that is agreed to with Washington, between Washington and Moscow, that is less than a total military victory by Moscow will not be honored by the West. Even if Trump wants to honor it, his administration will not allow it to be honored, and his successors certainly will not honor it.
I think just before I will turn it to Matt, I think that the reason why is still kind of keep their feelings under control is that Russia is advancing. You see, if Russia would probably stop this advance or even fall back, then of course maybe reaction will be stronger. But as long as Russia advances, every day advances, and on both on Ukrainian territory and on Russian territory. So this gives some kind of satisfaction and allowing Putin to continue this in the hope that this summit will be sooner than later. But all of us observers, we can only hope that this indeed will be sooner than later.
I would, I would just throw out a couple of points and then get Jim's final assessment on a thought I have, but which is number one, at his World Economic Forum, very short but concise address, Trump did make an allusion towards the need for a nuclear disarmament, which was a sort of replay of some efforts that we saw that he made in 2019, 2020 that didn't go anywhere. But the I think orientation is a good one as a sentiment. If you had the ear of Trump, if you were able to actually be in the same room with Trump, Tulsi, and a couple of other people, what would you say that they should think about now going into the coming weeks of battle and months of battle going forward, knowing that there's so many vipers out to sabotage any types of danger of peace through collaboration? What sort of advice would you give?
I would say to him very bluntly, if your goal is to make America great again, America cannot be great and the American empire still survive. You have to liquidate our global empire and concentrate on building our country, our infrastructure. I mean, that's something he promised in his first term. Supposedly Steve Bannon told him that your first bill out of the box should be an infrastructure bill, and instead they went with a tax bill, which you would get from any Republican administration. We should be building our country back. We should be looking at, where's our Belt and Road Initiative through the Western Hemisphere? Why aren't we building stuff like they're building in Eurasia? That's where your focus needs to be. But you cannot do that if you insist that we have to call the shots in the whole rest of the world. We have to be willing to say to those other regions, Europe and Middle East and so forth, not our business. We're walking away. You guys take care of it. Can he bring himself to do that? I don't know that he can. He still seems to think that America is in command of all which she surveys. We can build up America even better by trying to boss the rest of the world around. If, there's a BRICS currency, we're going to put 100% tariffs on them and save the dollar and this and that. I think, unfortunately, if he keeps going down this road, aside from whatever he does about Ukraine or Iran or Taiwan or whatever, if he doesn't manage to blow up the world, he's going to end up being kind of like an American Gorbachev by trying to save not only a system that's on the edge of collapse domestically, he's going to try to save a global ideological system that simply cannot be saved. And I don't know if he realizes that. I think that's the fundamental decision he needs to make, and I don't think anybody's going to put it to him that way.
Okay, well, Jim, this is very informative. Thank you so much for your time. And Matt, anything that you want to finish with?
No, that was perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. We need that sort of voice of common sense and reason with a constructive outlook towards navigating through this minefield. So, Jim, you hit it out of the park. Thank you very much for sharing your wisdom, your insights, and I look forward to future conversations.
I know that I'm going to pledge it. I will, of course, quote Jim in my next article about homework for Keith Kellogg. I will quote you on exactly what you just said.
That's right. Read Matt Ehret.
Listen to Jim Jatras and Ed. All right, guys. This is great.
Thank you, guys.
Well,
the music is still playing in my speaker, my headphones. People can't hear anything, right? No, of course not. All right. Well, that was, I thought, a very poignant assessment by Jim. And of course, Jim's writings, as well as the link to the Rachel Blevins interview, will be in the description box under this video for those who want to follow through on Jim's broader analysis of world events. Next up, we have still Alex, Krainer, and Drago. And I thought Drago Bosnic would be an appropriate follow-up. He's been an amazing geopolitical analyst. He writes for InfoBricks, which is a very important reference, a news source that I suggest everybody follow on a regular basis. Drago has been at this for a while. He's based in Serbia and has a pretty good handle on colored revolutionary activities with an orientation towards solutions. So, Drago, I see you right there. I think we got over our technical issues. Can you hear me?
Yeah, finally. Yeah. Sorry about that.
No, so that's fine. So how about you go next? Share your thoughts and considerations of where we're at right now, and for the good and for the bad, and then we'll close it with Alex, followed by a short dialogue with the audience. So go for it, Drago.
I can start now, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, as people know, back in September, I think it was on September 21. Victoria Nuland took over, or actually joined the board of the directors of NED. And of course, for those who don't know, NED being the National Endowment for Democracy, which is this sort of CIA-run organization that essentially finances and conducts these color revolutions. And this was an event that wasn't really, prominent. It wasn't all around the news, so people missed it for the most part. However, in the last several months, we've seen a bunch of these color revolutions and unrests and protests in various countries. And of course, people who understand how color revolutions work and how this sort of military technology, because it's part of a grander military strategy of the United States and NATO. For those who don't know how they work, well, essentially you take something that people can protest about, and of course you use it for political or geopolitical purposes. And this is what's going on in several countries that have pushed against the globalist empire, and specifically that's Georgia and Slovakia. On the other hand, in Serbia, we have a political leadership that's been largely compliant with NATO and EU requests. I would say if I had to take a rough estimate, it would be around 80%. However, these people, they don't tolerate any sort of non-compliance. So even the 20% that we're not delivering, they don't want that. They want total control. And for the issue for NATO, of course, is they don't want a country that's not fully compliant behind their backs while they're preparing some sort of a war with Russia. So they've started this, let's say, a bunch of these protests in Serbia. I'm not saying that these are unjustified. The government has issues with the corruption and everything else, but the point is those issues exist in every country. So there are ways to deal with that. And while the protests were about this, I understood it, and I kind of even supported the idea of getting rid of corrupt officials. However, knowing what I know about color revolutions, I realized that the requests of protesters or the requests of those people who want to control the protests are not going to be only about corruption, because it never is only about that. Now they have political requests, and then the prime minister resigned. And now there are these so-called student professor councils that want to elect the new government, which is not how democracy works, as far as I know. I mean, they should just, have an election, right? But no, they don't. They're not talking about that. They're talking about just the need for these experts, so-called experts, to choose the next, government, to choose which minister is going to run which department, and so on and so on. So to me, this seems and looks a lot more like a color revolution, and then a bunch of these celebrities, so to speak, which are part of the globalist empire, have come out and in support of the protest. For example, Marina Abramović, who is a well-known exponent of this globalist system. And I think she's quite famous, or should I say infamous, for most of our audience. So the question, the fact that she's supporting this protest is quite telling, I would say.
Yes, absolutely. And for those who may not be aware, Marina Abramović is a self-professed witch, and somebody I think who Zelensky even assigned to be in charge of child protection services in Ukraine or something to that effect. And
Or kids.
Yes. Yeah. Now, I had a quick question before we go to Alex, and maybe Ed has a question too. But I just want to throw out there. I've recently been reading about a cut or a freezing of U.S. aid funding that Trump has overseen, where he basically said no more U.S. aid funding for foreign grants. Has this in any way positively impacted the ability to carry out some of these revolutionary activities or color revolutionary activities
Absolutely.
in Europe? Yeah,
absolutely. Specifically for former Yugoslavia, the amount of money that these NGOs were getting is at least $1.7 billion in the last several years. So just to put that into perspective, the military budget of Serbia is around $2 billion. So with that kind of money, you can essentially finance an army of NGO people. So I'm not saying every protester is paid off. The point is, you just need several people who are good at leading at least a group of 100 people, and that's all you need to create a mass protest that's going to involve 10,000, 15,000, 100,000 people, and that's all you need. And now this money is essentially gone. And of course, they still have it because the EU is also funding the parts of those NGOs. But the point is, it's a lot less money. So the protests are not entirely controlled by these so-called leftist or liberal groups. Many of them are patriotic organizations that don't mean harm to the country, obviously. And this is an issue for these leftists. I mean, I'm using that term in the modern context. It has nothing to do with leftism, obviously. But these so-called leftist groups usually control the protests for the most part. But now they have an issue because they can't really, they don't have any ideological connection with the patriotic organizations. On the contrary, they're completely different in ideologically speaking. So now this is an issue for them. And this is a good thing. The protests cannot escalate as long as these NGOs don't control them entirely. So that's the good thing. So we already see the effects of Trump's decision to cut funding for these groups and these people. Hopefully it's going to stay like that. The USAid was very, very important in that regard. I mean, they were providing much, if not most of the money that was going to these NGOs. Now that money being gone, of course, that means they have far less incentive to move forward with this and to escalate the protest.
Thank you. Ed, did you have a thought or a question, or should we go to Alex?
Yes, the only thing I want to say a few words, going back to just what Jim Jatras said, that what he said 2 days ago, I attended something similar what we are doing right now, but it was offline at the Metropolitan Club. For those who don't know, it's just across the street from the White House. And the speaker was David Stockman. And David Stockman was in the Reagan administration. So the reason I mention because Jim Jatras also worked with the Reagan administration and George Bush Sr. And David Stockman was even more critical of this American empire, a global empire. And he said that NATO should be immediately dissolved. So it really was, sees that we still have some freedom in Washington, a little bit, because across the street from White House, Metropolitan Club, it's a very prestigious place. It was full-packed auditorium, and we were talking about dissolution of NATO. So this is gives me some hope that we are not at the dead end yet.
Yep. All right. So I think with that, the stage is set for Alex Krainer. Alex, are you there? Can you hear and see us? Oh, well, by the way, Alex, if you're on, okay, now you're off mute. Okay.
Yeah, everybody can hear?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Oh, good. So, if it's okay, I need about 15 minutes. I wanted to go over. I've been working for the past 2 years on a book about the war in Ukraine, and I thought I wanted to go over parts of it because some of this stuff I think got a little bit lost in the, how do you call it, in all the rhetoric and all the events, because there's been a lot going on, very complex. And so I think I need about 15 minutes, if that's okay.
Sure. It's yours.
All right. So I'll just go. So in 1949, the US and UK formed, this is just to give a little bit of context, and then I'll skip into other things because I also prepared this. I deleted a lot of stuff to make it go a bit faster. So for context, you might need to use your imagination a little bit. But anyway, in 1949, the US and UK formed a 12-member North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, as a defensive alliance against the communist world. Greece and Turkey joined in 1952. In 1955, NATO added Western Germany, and only at that point did the Soviet Union react by forming the Warsaw Pact. From that time, two blocs existed in a state of Cold War until 1991, when the USSR finally collapsed. Western liberal democracies emerged victorious from the Cold War. The communist bloc collapsed, and the great ideological enemy in the East was no longer. For some reason, however, NATO did not declare victory and disband at that point. Instead, it started to expand eastward in the direction of Russia's borders, and in several waves of expansion, 5 waves exactly, NATO added 14 new member states, moving over 1,600 kilometers closer to Russia. Today, with the recent addition of Finland and Sweden, the alliance counts 32 members and officially recognizes another 3 aspirant nations being Bosnia and Herzegovina, Georgia, and Ukraine. If all these nations became NATO members, the alliance would be leaning against the nearly full extent of Russia's western borders, with the exception of Belarus. NATO, quote, NATO has decided to, this is from Stephen Cohen, quote from Stephen Cohen, quote, NATO has decided to quadruple its military forces on Russia's borders or near Russia's borders. The last time there was this kind of Western hostile military force on Russia's borders was when Nazis invaded Russia in 1941. There has never been anything like this. During the 40 years Cold War, there was this vast buffer zone that ran from Soviet borders all the way to Berlin. Unquote. The United States built anti-ballistic missiles bases in Romania and Poland, deployed nuclear bomb-capable aircraft close to Russia, and allocated $8 billion of US taxpayers' money to upgrade their arsenal of B-61 nuclear bombs stockpiled in the United States and 5 other NATO member nations. These deployments were accompanied with increasingly belligerent, provocative behavior. NATO forces have been conducting as many as 40 major military exercises per year in Russia's immediate neighborhood. Movement of these military assets in the vicinity of Russia's borders went from purely reconnaissance hardware to battle-ready ships and aircraft equipped with precision munitions and cruise missiles, which often approach Russian territory to as close as 10 miles. On these occasions, they often activated their missiles in repeated mock attacks on Russian targets. In September 2020, Chief of Operations of Russia's High Command, Sergei Rutskoy, stated that NATO was staging between 33 and 40 such flight approaches per week using fighter jets from Sweden, Germany, Ukraine, and Italy. As recently as June 2021, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg boasted that perhaps the most important thing we have done is that for the first time in NATO's history, we have combat-ready troops in the eastern part of the alliance. New battle groups are deployed to the Baltic countries and Poland. We have tripled the size of the NATO readiness force. The readiness was not only targeted against Russia, but also against ethnic Russians living outside of Russia in the former Soviet republics. Thus, in August 2018, after 4 years' preparations, NATO launched the largest war games in Latvia. These were the largest military exercises in the country's history, comprising some 10,000 troops from the Latvian Armed Forces, National Guard, and law enforcement, as well as personnel from US, Canada, Spain, Italy, Poland, and other Baltic states. Part of the drills included the deployment of troops to counter unrest in the towns of Valmiera and Jekabils, both of which are populated by a Russian ethnic majority. So I'll spend a minute talking about what happened in Georgia in 2008 and prior. Collapse of the Soviet Union found Georgia's future president Mikhail Saakashvili studying international relations in Kiev, where he became BFFs with Petro Poroshenko, the future president of Ukraine. He got a fellowship from the US State Department and went on to study law at Georgetown University and Columbia Law School, where he obtained a Master of Law degree in 1994. Next year, 1995, the 28-year-old Saakashvili returned to Georgia, and almost immediately his political career took off like a rocket. That same year, he won a seat in the parliament and became a chairman of parliamentary committee in charge of reforming Georgia's police, judiciary, and electoral systems. In October 2000, at only 32 years of age, Saakashvili became President Edward Shevardnadze's Minister of Justice. He resigned from the post less than a year later, ostensibly as a revolt against government corruption. The following month, Saakashvili formed his own political party and challenged Shevardnadze in November 2003 presidential elections. He lost, but claimed that the elections were rigged and led a mass revolt that would become Georgia's Rose Revolution. The White House supported the uprising, describing it as one of the most powerful movements in history. After 20 days of protests, Shevardnadze resigned. New elections were held in January 2004, and Saakashvili's bid was backed by his American advisors, most notably Daniel Kunin of USAID and National Democratic Institute for International Affairs, Randy Scheunemann, then Senator John McCain's top foreign policy advisor. This time, the 36-year-old Saakashvili won 96% of the vote and became the new president of Georgia. Almost immediately, he embarked upon a major buildup of Georgia's army, boosting military spending from 1% of GDP to 8%. In absolute terms, between 1999 and 2007, military spending increased 20-fold. Of course, the top beneficiaries of this bonanza were American military contractors who provided numerous advisors and poured large quantities of equipment into Georgia. Under Saakashvili, Georgian army frequently conducted exercises alongside US troops and also became one of the biggest supporters of NATO military missions in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Kosovo. Saakashvili intended to make Georgia a NATO member. His aspiration received a major boost in April 2008 when the alliance issued its Bucharest Memorandum, making it explicit that Georgia and Ukraine would definitely become members. 4 months later, Saakashvili attempted to earn his war stripes by staging a major provocation against Russia. Only days after completing yet another very large military exercise with the US forces, and while Russian President Medvedev and Prime Minister Putin were both visiting China to attend the opening of the Beijing Olympic Games, Saakashvili mobilized fully half of Georgia's military and launched a massive 14-hour missile and artillery attack on South Ossetia, a region of Georgia that was partly under protection of Russian peacekeeping forces. But Russian leadership was not asleep at the wheel. President Medvedev ordered Russian troops into Georgia, and they rapidly pushed back Georgian forces. After only 5 days of combat, US-trained Georgian army collapsed in disarray, and Russian troops quickly took control of 4 key Georgian cities: Poti, Kori, Senaki, and Zugdidi. After a few weeks, Russian troops backed up and withdrew from Georgia, but the episode foreshadowed the more important plan to bring Ukraine into NATO. Making Ukraine a full member of NATO was strategically of paramount importance to the imperial oligarchy. Situated in the heart of Eastern Europe and with a large Russian-speaking population, its border with Russia extended over 1,200 miles and reached to within 400 miles from Moscow. It was the ideal staging ground to antagonize, destabilize, and invade Russia. With its Black Sea coast extending over 800 miles, Ukraine could be used to deprive Russia of key warm water ports, effectively cutting her off from the Mediterranean. The clarion call for the action was sounded by Karl Gershman, one of the leading neocons and the longtime president of the National Endowment for Democracy. On 26 September 2013, he wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post explaining that the ultimate objective in using Ukraine was to isolate Russia and to remove President Putin from power. Ukraine, wrote Gershman, is the biggest prize. As soon as the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, NATO already initiated collaboration with Ukraine, and this relationship was formalized in July 1997 with the Charter on Distinctive Partnership signed in Madrid. From there, the cooperation steadily expanded with the view of making Ukraine the strategic beachhead at the Russia's doorstep. But in order for NATO to forge a united, all for one and one for all kind of front against Russia, it was imperative to make Ukraine not only a partner, but a full member of the alliance. And to achieve that goal, stronger means were needed to persuade the reluctant Ukrainians. The imperial cabal would resort to the same trusty scheme that was used with all Eastern European nations. They made Ukraine's EU aspirations conditional upon her joining NATO first. The attraction of joining the EU was the promise of economic development and prosperity for the long-suffering Ukrainian people. But the Europeans were never interested in welcoming Ukraine as a member. From the first Ukraine-EU summit in 1997, European representatives had been stringing Ukrainian delegations along for nearly 25 years, through interminable negotiations, 24 consecutive summits, and countless meetings, always stalling, obfuscating, pressing new conditions, and making ever more stringent demands. Even after the Ukraine's association agreement was finalized at the 11th summit in 2011, its signing was again postponed. At that time, the president of the EU Commission, José Manuel Barroso, sanctimoniously declared that, quote, "The Ukrainian authorities need to demonstrate they abide by the values that are at the heart of the association: democracy, rule of law, respect of human rights, and independence of the judiciary," unquote. All the while, Ukraine's fragile economy was kept on life support by Russia. Between 1991 and 2014, Ukraine's economy was the world's very worst performer. Its GDP declined by 35% over those 24 years. one of the only 5 nations in the world whose GDP had shrunk over this period. The second worst performer was Moldova with minus 29% GDP growth and Georgia with minus 15% GDP growth. It is relevant to note that all 3 of these nations had been designated as strategic beachheads for future conflict with Russia, and all followed advice of Western consultants for their economic development. So following Karl Gershman's clarion call in the fall of 2013, they readied the decisive gambit to fully take control of Ukraine, their biggest prize. Gershman urged the US government to push European free trade agreements on Ukraine and disrupt Moscow's effort to maintain close ties with the neighbor. 4 days later, the Obama administration obliged. On October 30th, 2013, it fired the first diplomatic shot at undermining the administration of Ukraine's duly elected President Viktor Yanukovych. They did so in Vienna by filing a warrant for the arrest and extradition of Ukrainian national Dmytro Firtash. Firtash was Yanukovych's key political ally and one of Ukraine's most influential oligarchs. This lawfare attack on Ukraine Ukraine's president was coordinated by the former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, Undersecretary of State Victoria Nuland, and Attorney General Eric Holder. 3 days later, Nuland flew to Kiev to personally deliver the administration's ultimatum to President Yanukovych. After their meeting, she triumphantly declared that the president, quote, "The president made clear that Ukraine has made its choice and its choice is for Europe." The very next day, November 4th, 2013, Obama administration dropped their extradition request against Firtash. Secret records that were subsequently revealed by the Landesgerichts Street Regional Court in Vienna in April 2015 proved that Nuland had used the extradition warrant against Firtash to pressure Yanukovych into accepting EU association agreement. To this day, Western media continues to label Yanukovych as a pro-Putin or pro-Russia president and insinuates that Vladimir Putin had him on remote control. This was not the case, however. Yanukovych maneuvered opportunistically between Europe, Russia, and China, playing one against the other and trying to gain favor for each while keeping the others in check. Shortly after taking office, he infuriated Vladimir Putin by declining to join the customs union with Russia and by prosecuting his political rival Julia Tymoshenko over the gas supply contract she had signed with Russia, accusing her of signing an unfavorable deal. Yanukovych's dealing with China left the Chinese leadership equally disappointed. Beijing provided his government with a $3 billion pre-export funding for grain supplies, but Ukraine breached their agreement and China later had to sue Ukraine for compensation in the London Court of International Arbitration. The question that arises with regards to the European Association and Victoria Nuland's trip to Kiev in November 2013 is this: why was it necessary to blackmail Ukraine's president into signing the EU association agreement? Wasn't joining the prosperous and democratic EU the natural and politically popular aspiration for Ukraine? As it turned out, the EU association agreement was so thoroughly rotten that extra strength means of persuasion were indeed necessary. The agreement wasn't just some mutually beneficial arrangement for Ukraine to become a valued member of the prestigious European club, as it was being sold to the Ukrainian and European public. Rather, it was a comprehensive surrender of Ukraine's sovereignty to the unelected bureaucracy of the EU. It would have opened Ukraine's domestic markets to European goods and hand almost complete control over Ukraine's economic relations, foreign trade, and technical standards to Brussels. The association agreement included 1,000 pages of EU directives for Ukraine to comply with. Every section mandated that Ukrainian laws be harmonized with the EU requirements. Furthermore, in signing the agreement, Ukraine would not only commit to complying with the existing EU directives, but also with all the future ones, even though Ukrainian representatives would have no say in their formulation. Moreover, volunteering to become a de facto colony of the EU would come at an extortionate price for Ukraine. The figure that was bandied about in the media at the time, as calculated by some German advisory group, was about $3 billion. But Ukraine's Institute for Economics and Forecasting at the National Academy of Sciences conducted their own due diligence and estimated that the cost of meeting EU standards would require an investment of at least $160 billion. This much was acknowledged even by German magazine Der Spiegel. For Ukraine, even 3 billion was a problem. The 160 billion sum was impossible. Still, rather than killing the deal, President Yanukovych reached out to the European leaders to ask them for help and to fund the demanded transition. In talks with the German representative Stefan Füle, he asked if EU could help with all those costs, but Füle flatly rejected his request. Sorry, we're not the IMF. The IMF itself was less than helpful. On 20th November 2013, they proposed a 4 billion loan, but it came with strings attached and conditions that Prime Minister Mykola Azarov could only describe as extremely harsh. The IMF demanded that Ukraine double the domestic price of electricity and increase natural gas prices by 40%. At IMF's insistence, they were already increased by 50% in 2010.
Yeah,
in addition, yes.
Hey, can we do in 2 more minutes? Can we? Just because we
Yeah,
have
yeah. I have.
a deadline. I'm so sorry, man. This is super important material.
I know. 11. I went through 11 pages. I have 2 more.
Okay, cool.
Or
Go
maybe
for
two
it.
and a half. Okay.
All right.
I'll speed up. So, in addition, Ukraine was to lift the ban on sale of agricultural lands to private investors, devalue its currency by 25%, force a savage austerity program on Ukrainian people, including a drastic cut of pensions, and push a wide-ranging privatization of state-owned enterprises. All this would force the impossible hardship of the nation's economy and make it impossible for Ukraine to accept the EU association as proposed. After 25 years of mismanagement, Ukraine's economy was extremely fragile. Even while its trade relationship with Russia was intact, the IMF has suspended funding to Ukraine multiple times between 1998 and 2008 due to her inability to meet IMF structural reform requirements. Ukraine's people and businesses had already been pushed to the limit and then some. In 2014, more than 25% of Ukraine's population was living below the official poverty line, which corresponded to a monthly income of $127 or less. In reality, the percentage of Ukrainians living in poverty was much higher than that, as the average salary at the time was $131 per month or 54 cents per hour. The crushing poverty exacerbated by the IMF had forced nearly 14% of Ukraine's populations to emigrate. When Ukraine became independent in 1991, its population was 51.6 million. By 2014, it declined to 44.5 million, and it was one of the most dramatic cases of demographic collapse in modern history. The majority of emigres fled to Russia, where they could expect to earn at least 3 to 4 times more than what they were earning in Ukraine. To break the deadlock with the Europeans, Putin government proposed a compromise and tried to persuade the EU to make an economic agreement tripartite as to preserve Ukraine's trade relations with Russia. They also offered 1/3 of reduction on imports of prices of Russian gas and a generous 15 billion aid package for Ukraine with no preconditions. However, after Ukraine had already received the first tranche of this loan in the amount of 3 billion, European representatives cried foul. And in his March 8, 2014 interview, Putin said, "Our Western partners have asked us not to do this. They have asked us to work through the IMF and encourage Ukraine to carry out the reforms." Ukraine was hardly capable of complying with the IMF's harsh conditions, but refusing the fund's helping hand tends to have very severe consequences. For example, both the 2014 war in Yemen and the 2019 coup in Bolivia followed after these nations had rejected IMF's offers. Submission to the diktat of Western financial powers is compulsory, not optional. I will conclude just by stating that it was actually the IMF that precipitated the civil war in Ukraine because after the coup, they pressured the Ukrainian government, the junta in Kiev that replaced Yanukovych, to launch the anti-terror operations because they conditioned IMF's help on uniting the whole country. So they said, "You'll get the money, but you have to take control of the Donbas and of Crimea." So the point is, this was not an unprovoked thing. It was part of a wider strategy of trying to destroy Russia, and it's the same strategy that is still active. Only they're running out of Ukrainians, and the next might be Moldovans. Georgians saved themselves for the time being, and Romanians. Anyway, that's all I had to say about that.
Alex's Trend Compass is an incredibly important resource. Again, I highly recommend people subscribe to Trend Compass. And what's really great about you, Alex, is that you're taking not just a historical understanding of dynamics into consideration, but you're also combining it with geoeconomic analysis. With too many people and they don't properly appreciate the financial manipulations, the IMF, the World Bank, City of London shenanigans that set the context in which a lot of the geopolitical events tend to occur. So you don't tend to break those apart, and I really appreciate this, especially the historical backdrop. So without further ado, we have time for a brief Q&A with the audience. I've asked people to put their names in the chat box to be called upon accordingly. But first, before we do that, Ed, did you have any final considerations before we jump into that?
No, let's go to Q&A, and then I will say a few words at the end.
Sounds good. All right. So, Comme Capetier, I noticed your voice there first, and then we have Cree Energy, Gerald, and Richard. So, Comme, are you there?
Yes. Hello, Matt and everyone. I'm here. I did ask my question in writing. It is not directly connected to what has been said by the three speakers, but I think it's an interesting thing, which we may, of course, discuss more in detail outside this circle, because basically I am, of course, interested in the development of the proposed partnership between the Verona Initiative and the Peace Forum. And I think that the India Foundation is keen, on behalf, indirectly or sort of semi-officially, of behalf of the government of India, to get more involved in this process, because India is also assessing the impact of Trump's measures and what's happening in both in Ukraine and in other parts of the world. And so, anyway, this is, to put it very briefly, I would like to facilitate this further participation of India in this forum and in the initiatives that may result from it. So that's basically what I wanted to say.
Right. Yeah, thank you. That's a good idea. And definitely the substance for future conversation. Yeah, Cree Energy. Cree Energy based in Alberta. I don't know your actual name, but feel free to pose a question.
Yeah, okay. My name is Jacob, and I am with the Cree Energy Oil and Gas. So my question is, can we get indigenous oil and gas to the BRICS nations? We can pledge. So I'm more of a practically, how do we practically get business happening? I know that Canada has the, I can't remember what the act was called, but it's basically an agreement where China actually comes in and they own a lot of assets in Alberta and British Columbia. But apparently those are only for colonial companies. The indigenous oil and gas companies are not allowed, or I don't know if they're not allowed, but I would like to have company, like a dialogue between Cree Energy and a BRIC interested partner, because I know that there's a lot of good things happening in the world. Yeah, that's my first question. So does anybody have an answer to that, or?
Well, I think that's sort of an ambiguity still floating above this conversation, which obviously in my assessment, and I'd be curious to see if Alex or anybody else wants to chime in with a thought. We have yet to see the character of what we're hearing discussions about reactivating American productive industrial power for the first time after many, many decades of deindustrialization, post-industrialism, consumerism. So we see that there's apparently a reorientation towards valuing production again. But is it being done within the context or the geopolitical mindset of preparing for confrontation against Russia and China, or is it being done with a more genuine spirit of actually looking for building up a community of cooperative nation states working together? I think that ambiguity has not at all been resolved in my view. So I hope so. I hope that this type of opening up of the Arctic and a lot of the resources in Canada might play a very important role in a broader pro-global development orientation that avoids war. But I don't know that. I don't know if Ed or Alex or anyone has a thought.
I can add something to that. First of all, we need like maybe one-page summary of what you propose. If you can send it, you have my email and Matt's email. And then this interesting story is that new Russian ambassador to Washington, Mr. Darchiv. He used to be ambassador in Canada. So he's moving, and so he knows both countries. He's Russian. He worked in Canada and now in United States. And I promise that I will try to pass your 1 page or 2 pages, whatever proposal, to his office, and maybe they will put you in touch directly with those dealing with BRICS. So
that'd be excellent.
Usually you start with a 1-2 page summary. So please send it, and I promise that I will make sure that Russian ambassador sees it.
Much appreciated. And my second question was, what about Mark Carney? Looks like he might be the Prime Minister of Canada unelect for a period of time. What do you think about that, Mark? Matt. And I'm going to mute my mic.
You're right. It looks like he will be the replacement for Justin Trudeau in the upcoming March leadership convention. Trudeau is all used up. He's going to be replaced. Mark Carney will be brought in, it seems, which would, I believe, make him an interim prime minister. I think that he's a relatively ideological technocrat who's known as the Green New Deal prophet of the central bankers, and not a very healthy dialogue partner for anybody wishing to have real development. So I'm weary, and we'll see where that goes. But that's my preliminary thought of Mark Carney as prime minister. So I don't know if that helps or makes you demoralized, but so we'll see. So let's go to Gerald Pechnik.
Yeah, can you hear me okay, Matt?
Sure.
Okay. So I've been a long time associated with Lyndon LaRouche since 1974. And since 1991, I worked closely with the fellow who unfortunately passed away this past Thursday in Champaign, Illinois, Professor Francis Boyle. I worked with him since 1991. And the reason I'm bringing those two figures up is because 2 comments, one on the U.S. situation to address the paradox that Ed posed in the beginning, which way is Trump going to go? And number 2, on the international, the 4 powers. I think Matt has interviewed Will Wirtz, who authored, I thought, a revolutionary book showing the British East India Company today is still the British East India Company that prevented Russia from helping India by assassinating the Paul I and similar things. The Russia's help to the U.S. during the Civil War, with the Russian Navy coming to New York and San Francisco. So those are the 2 areas. Quickly, Professor Boyle and I got the Izetbegovic government and Boyle together, and they filed the case in Hague charging Serbia with genocide around Srebrenica situation, and the British, Lord Peter Carrington and Kissinger, with being the architects of the overall war. Boyle's case against Serbia passed, and I think it was Milosevic was held accountable. But the case that Bosnia's government, Izetbegovic government, brought against the British threatened to starve Bosnia. And even though we had the proof that Carrington and Kissinger were the actual architects of the war, the Izetbegovic government withdrew the case because the British threatened to starve them, threatened them, which, as Boyle said, if you got the British, then you would get who's the hand behind all of the cases, whether it's Gaza, whether it's Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So my point is we need the four powers. It's not going to work without Russia, China, US, and India collaborating. That's what Mr. LaRouche kept saying. You need the power of those four countries, and the British are going to play off one versus the other. So that's comment one. Number two, on the U.S. It's very important. Anyone who's in the U.S., call their senators tonight, tomorrow, because what you got with Tulsi Gabbard, what you got with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., etc., Kash Patel, this is the heart of the defeat, and to make sure that Trump does go with what he really wants to do, which is work with Putin, work with India, work with China. And that, my wife and I started I'm in California MAGA project to get all the pro-Trump people together. The California GOP refused to endorse Trump. We had a resolution to end the war in Ukraine, and the California GOP defeated it. We spoke on the floor of conventions on this. So we know it's the Republican rhinos who are trying to sabotage Trump. And by bringing the Democrats in, Robert Kennedy, Tulsi Gabbard, Elon Musk was a Democrat. We have the basis. We have the basis of actually succeeding. And that's why what Trump is doing is he's flooding the zone against the British. He's releasing the JFK, RFK, ML King documents. He's gone to war against the deep state. And that's what everyone should unite globally and nationally to support. And Boyle was a big supporter of LaRouche, worked with Ramsey Clark for years. I think Ramsey and Boyle had a disagreement about Serbia, because Ramsey did defend Milosevic, I believe, at the World Court. So anyway, these are just the kind of things that I'm aware of. Thank you.
Thank you for those considerations, Jerry. Anybody want to speak to any of that? I know Alex has written, Jerry, this is extremely important. Where could I read up on Lord Carrington and Kissinger's involvement in the Bosnian War? Alex had his skin in the game as well. So I think we're all very curious about that. So Gerald, if you could email me some of the resources that you referenced, and I'll include them in the description box when I upload this video so people can dig more into some of those leads that you provided.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Thank you.
I can provide some of it. Some was personal communications between Boyle and me, but I can provide the actual cases on the two things that went to the World Court. That I can get you.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody want to speak to any other elements of what Gerald just put out there, or shall we go to the next question?
I just wanted to add a comment about a particular case that happened in Bosnia that left me very perplexed to this very day. And some Croatian generals actually are serving time for war crimes. But there was a massacre in the village of Ahmići at one point, I think in 1994 or 1995. And it was the case, the narrative was that the Croatian troops went in and massacred the Muslim, practically the totality of the Muslim inhabitants of this village of Ahmići. And the reason why they supposedly did this was because previously the Muslim troops massacred a bunch of Croatian people in a nearby village. So, the narrative went like, oh, centuries old hatreds and passions and anyway, the general who was in charge at the top of the command and control structure of these troops that supposedly did all this is I think now serving time in The Hague. Anyway, what came through the grapevine at that time was that it was actually the British Special Forces who orchestrated the massacres, who led the massacres. They didn't necessarily do all the killings because they did bring some Croatians with them, but it was the Brits. That was the the rumors, and a lot of people in Croatia were talking about this. And the rumor got so much traction because there was actually corroborating evidence that the BBC took the trouble to shoot a documentary about this. And the documentary completely exonerates the Brits because they were only there to try to save lives and bring all these primitive tribes to the negotiating table, the same old rap. And I saw this documentary, must be 96, 97, 98, whenever it was, maybe 99. I don't remember. It was definitely at the time when I still thought that if it was on BBC, it was probably true. So after I saw the documentary, I thought, damn, I guess it was us. All right, well then that's that. But as we've seen so much more happen over the last 20 years, it becomes clear that the British have no qualms about playing these types of dirty tricks. And so now I'm again very perplexed, and I'm still kind of 50-50 about who did it. But if you say that Lord Carrington was up to his eyeballs in the Bosnia War, then that would tip me back into, it was the Brits.
Well, just remember, Alex, the British are on your side, they're on your enemy's side, they're on both sides, and they're on no one's side but their own. So if you keep that in mind, you won't fall for the quote, the little cheese that's left out there for you to believe the British are good guys because it's the other guy over there. He did it, they point both ways. Yeah, he did it, right? So
What is it that it was Lord Palmerston who said the British have no permanent friends, just permanent interests? So I think that goes to the heart of it. All right, we've got a list of a few more people that we want to get in there. So I'm asking people to keep the questions as condensed and economical as possible. Richard and Monty. So Richard first. Are you still there?
Yeah, I wanted to respond to your ambiguity. Just in the last couple of days, Marco Rubio came out and said the unipolar world is over. It was never going to last. It's now a multipolar world, which pretty much sets the direction. And when you look at Trump's emphasis on tariffs, well, tariffs are not sanctions. They are not interventions. They are oriented toward domestic economic development. So I think the pattern is set. And once you have that context, and Musk comes in with his cost-saving measures, well, in that context, closing down all the U.S. bases is a good start on saving a lot of money. I mean, it's a whole different world once we get into that context. So anyway, thank you.
Have we seen any evidence, guys, of discussions to close down any American military bases yet internationally? I think that's one of the things I'm waiting for.
Yeah, this is exactly what happened 2 days ago in Metropolitan Club. And David Stockman said that we have to bring back, close all those bases and bring Americans back.
Yeah.
And again, I want to emphasize for those who don't know, it's the guy who worked for Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, that's going to be a big one. And sure, I think that as well for me too, the question of multipolarity, there's different people trying to redefine what that word means. So as long as it's not being done under the zero-sum game, Hobbesian power projection with the idea of different jurisdictional blocks fighting in an Orwellian world of Eurasia and Oceania versus East Asia, as long as that's not the governing dynamic, it's wonderful. If it is, it could get messy. So we'll see. I don't know if there's any other Alex or Drago, do you guys have any considerations?
Martin?
Or Martin? Oh, there's Marty. I didn't even know you were there, Marty. Hey.
He was hiding.
Oh, okay. All right, let's go to I guess well, oh, there you are, Marty. You're off mute. Did you want to say a word?
Oh, okay. Now, or I mean, just well, as usual, a more pessimistic comment, unfortunately. Again, I'm very much in accord with Richard, Jerry, and of course Alex in their assessments. Being from Northern Ireland, I had the evidence of British manipulation, which they always do on a small scale in Ireland. First, it's always a laboratory, and afterwards you find exactly the same techniques and dirty tricks and even assassinations and manipulations are carried out on a massive scale and more subtly all around the world. One thing no one has mentioned so far is Keir Starmer's extraordinary signing of a 100-year treaty with Ukraine, with a promise of £3 billion sterling a year to Ukraine, plus other aid, when he was in Kiev a couple of weeks ago. Now, this is insane, since the British government, as Alex has done most work on, as you well know, and you, of course, know well too, Matt, Britain is close to bankruptcy and total collapse. But I believe this is why they're doing it. There are two patterns involved here. One is neo-imperialism. The old empire is gone. They cut themselves off suicidally from even the collapsing, chaotic mess in Europe, and they were much better off in Europe with all its problems than they are outside it. They have nowhere to go. The myths that they were sold to them on Brexit were all lies. They're useless in the world. They can't do anything. So what's the solution? The solution is a new empire. To enslave Ukraine, and B, to push ahead with the Halford, my friend at Pluralia from the University of Aquila in Rome, Professor Francesco Sidotti, has done extraordinary work on this, and that is the Halford Mackinder Lord Curzon program to break up Russia and make it basically enslave Eurasia is actually alive and well. Now, it's mad, it's insane, it can never be achieved, but this is what they are doing. And I have a piece coming up in Pluralia where I compare the idiocy of committing to a 100-year support for Ukraine against Russia to making a similar treaty in 1863 with the Confederacy against the United States for 100 years, because that nearly happened. It was going to happen. It was foiled by two events, one of which has already been discussed here. Tsar Alexander II sending the Russian Navy to New York City and to San Francisco to protect the United States and the Union against being dismembered and attacked by Britain and France, which were the two supreme naval powers in the world at the time, and America would have been defenseless against them. Only Russia had the power projection to protect America at the time, and they used it. And the second factor is where else has Britain got to go? Again, Ukraine's huge wealth, or the myth of Ukraine's huge wealth, coupled with Halford Mackinder's mad plans, which, remember, are what brought Hitler all the way to Stalingrad. Hitler through Haushofer, was an enthusiastic supporter of the Mackinder thesis, applying it to Germany against Russia rather than Britain against Russia. But the British are now mad, they're desperate, and this is a very dangerous situation because they can provoke a Russian attack against themselves, or they could try and take, with their many allies who hate Trump here in the United States, I think the president and vice president's lives are still potentially at risk. They are moving boldly. They are moving courageously. I don't agree with everything they're doing, even in many respects. I think the whole business about reopening federal government offices and forcing people back in is ridiculous, costs far too much money, and it's contrary to Trump's strategic policy of moving stuff out of Washington, D.C., and defederalizing the political structure in America rather than re-centralizing it. So I think Trump is, as usual, well-meaning, but very confused. And the one other point I would add in this ramble is great caution, because Rubio is Secretary of State. Keith Kellogg, who advocates leveraging force on Russia, and Trump has bought into his peace plan, which the Russians have already contemptuously rejected, and Scott Witter has written an outstanding piece on this. Trump thinks, even at the best, he's back in 2016, 2017, that he can leverage oil production in America to crash Russia's oil production. But Russia can produce oil much more cheaply than America can. They have a much lower break-even point. Cheap oil actually benefits Russia much more than it will benefit America. And Saudi Arabia, under the Crown Prince, is now strategically and economically an ally of Russia rather than the United States. They do not want to join the United States in bringing down Russia. They see security and protection from Russia and China as predictable allies and partners. So Trump does not see any of this. And he has surrounded himself with American idealists. I don't take Rubio's comments seriously, just in finishing, simply because Rubio will always sing for his supper and say whatever he is told to say, and he knows what Trump believes in. But Keith Kellogg and Waltz and the new Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, who is a dolt, all simply still imagine that, and Trump loves this too, that A, America is still number one, and B, even if we are in a multilateral world, we can bully everyone to do what we want to do. My final point on this is the Greenland fiasco, because America has Greenland already. We have had it since 1941. We can do whatever the hell we want in Greenland, and we do. So why bother taking it from Denmark when we already have it? He doesn't realize this. There's precedent for this. In early 1944, Winston Churchill, in one of his regular alcoholic, drunken late-night rambles, insisted that the British and American armed forces had to invade and liberate Greenland. This is all in the diaries and memoirs of the Chief of the Imperial General Staff, the head of the British Army, Field Marshal Lord Allenbrook, who was a fearless, an Irishman, therefore, a fearless and honest man. And Allenbrook wrote, we had to remind the Prime Minister, drunk as a stoat as usual, insists we invade and occupy Greenland. I have to remind him, we already have Greenland. This was happening at the top strategic directive level of the Allies in World War II. It was a farce. If he was reined in, of course, there were more sensible people around him. But this is the kind of mistake Trump has just made. So we cannot expect too much from Trump. And he has deliberately surrounded himself with American firsters. And while he says he believes, and sincerely believes, that he believes in diplomacy and negotiation, he thinks it's only what they call tough love, another American fantasy, that you can bully people into making peace on your terms. And of course, that'll be on their terms too, even though you're dictating it to them. But the Russians have lost scores of thousands of dead, maybe 100,000, not a million, certainly. But the most reliable figures I have seen is 88,000. And that's a lot, much less than per Ukrainians. But the Russians are winning this war. And they are not going to accept any terms imposed on them or that the Americans try to pressure them on. Sergei Lavrov has already made this very clear and spelled it out. And I think Rubio and Trump and those people are quite simply too stupid and too deaf to understand what the Russians have told them. So unfortunately, I'm very pessimistic, but there you are.
Thank you for sharing that composition, and I mean those are important considerations to put out there. I agree. Alex, are you raising a hand, or is that a hand raising, Alex?
No, that was an applause for Martin.
Oh, okay, all right. Yeah, I mean, again, it really comes down to this question of natural law in my mind. Are we in a position now where we recognize that the thing that's driven all of the stupid actions that have caused so much war and destruction and depopulation and famine for centuries upon centuries has been rooted in this idea that might makes right, that the world can be organized around a master-slave dichotomy of very elitist thinking or elitist ideologies that see the whole as simply, or that there's a zero-sum game, right? And that wealth is based on what you can steal, what you can extract, but not what you can create. And I think that looking at the multipolar alliance and its best expression right now, and America's better traditions and its best expression, there is this appreciation for the fact that if we are going to survive, we have to found our political economic decisions, our sense of self-interest on the truth, which is that we need to progress, to work together, to create together. And that's discoveries, sharing of culture. The Silk Road is one expression of that. And I'm hoping to God that Trump has enough inside of him to navigate through a lot of the vipers that are trying to bring back a more virulent, different Hobbesian vision than we've yet seen. So hopefully that can happen. We have time for a couple more questions before we have to round it out for today's session. And I know that Monty and Robert have been waiting for a while. So why don't we do that? Both quick questions, quick answers. Monty, go for it.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. Alex alluded to this insofar as his focusing on NATO, its historical background, the Nazi affiliations with it, and one of my observations is that NATO has the overt side to it, insofar as presumably a defensive alliance. In reality, it's really offensive, but the underside of it, in other words, there's the esoteric aspect and the exoteric aspect, or the overt and the covert. And the covert act part of NATO is really the underside of it is the secret army, the Operation Gladio. Now, it's very apparent that they're losing this war in Ukraine. In other words, not just Ukraine is losing, but NATO is losing, and they recognize this as an existential crisis on their part. And what they revert to when they're losing in conventional means is they revert to terrorism. They revert to terrorism. In other words, even some EU leaders came out this past week and alluded to the assassination. Oh, maybe we better assassinate Putin. So I would just highlight that it's necessary to understand that what they could and may very well be doing is reverting to terrorism around the world, cyber warfare, assassinations, forest fires, drone warfares, taking down aircraft. In other words, to keep this in mind. So I'll just put this out there.
Yeah. Asymmetrical operations are often ignored as far as the real insidious type of warfare. It's not always the conventional idea that we've been trained to think of when we think of warfare, of kinetic. But I think you've just brought some important considerations also to the table that we should always have in mind. Thank you. Any from Alex, Ed, any quick response to that, or should we move or Drago, any quick response, or should we go to Robert?
Well, I just want to say that regarding the British Empire, I think I'm paraphrasing Gandhi, or at least this quote is attributed to him. If you have two fish fighting in the bottom of the sea, a British ship is probably there. So I think I'm not sure if he really said that. I read it somewhere, but I think that pretty much it sums up the entire thalassocratic imperialist system that's essentially that has been destroying the world for centuries, for at least 500 years, as far as I know. And we can see that how the US, which was a very libertarian concept, was turned into a baton of this City of London imperialist thalassocratic empire that has been ravaging native civilizations and societies all across the world. So I think this is something that we should certainly take into account when the City of London does something. It's always to essentially push its interest wherever. And the divide and conquer strategy is pretty obvious, as was the case in former Yugoslavia or anywhere else.
Amen. All right, Robert.
All right. Thank you. A lot of interesting speeches today. I guess obviously to Matt, I would love to ask just about the idea of Krista Freeland. I thought she was more likely the front runner, but it sounds like it's the other way around. That's interesting. Obviously, there are two things I want to talk about. Well, there are a lot of things, but I'll just focus on two. One of them is if we're going to get maybe Tulsi Gabbard or RFK Jr., perhaps attest to Jim Jatras's comments about whether Trump is a choice, not an echo, to what's happening in Washington, is perhaps recess appointments if Tulsi doesn't get through. At least she would have 2 years to hopefully reform the institutions. And maybe that's something we could all push, a recess appointment, should the Senate not actually confirm or allow these nominees to go through, these transformative nominees to go through. The second idea, actually, my second question is more about Serbia. We haven't really done much about this issue, but I would love to ask the Serbian person if the sort of the status of the Serbian population left in Kosovo. We think of Serbia being subservient to NATO, but there's literally Serbian people who are in danger by the Kosovar Albanians. And I'm kind of curious, what is their current status? And maybe, if necessary, what can we do to maybe allow Serbia to bring some of those Serbians back to Serbia so that they're at least out of harm's way?
All right, Drago, I think that's yours.
Yeah, thank you for the question. That's a very good question. Serbia, unfortunately, is subservient to NATO, and I hate it, but that's the case. It has been part of NATO's peace partnership program and several other SOFA and EPAP agreements, and that's been the case since late October 2000. So that's around almost 25 years. It's going to be 25 years this year. In that regard, there's not much that the Serbian state can do for the Serbs in Kosovo, because the point is, without military power, you cannot protect your people in an area that is not under your control. And this is the issue for us. The Albanians have always been extremely aggressive. They have this concept of whoever owns the herd also owns the pasture. That's what they usually say. So that means that Serbs who are left in Kosovo, which is just a fraction of the population that was there prior to 1999, they've been subjected to extremely inhumane treatment. They live in these ghettos. I'm not even sure how else to call them. These are very secluded communities which are not integrated into the rest of the society because they are considered outcasts. There's regular violence against them. I was there in September 2023 during the unrests. I couldn't get a single interview for anyone because people are afraid to talk about anything. They're afraid. Obviously, I said we could use a pseudonym or something. We don't have to use your real name. I told one person, and he said that he is too afraid that he's going to be discovered, and then he and his family would be in danger. Of course, I didn't insist, nor would I. The issue is, as long as NATO occupies this Serbian province, we don't have much of a chance. The Serbs there don't have much of a chance. If we remove them from there, that's going to be the end of the ethnic cleansing that the Albanians have been doing for the last several centuries, because they've been doing it during the Ottoman Empire as well. So a lot of Serbs who are there also don't want to go. They don't want to leave because they've been there for centuries, for millennia, essentially, in many cases. So, and it's not just Serbs. There are various other minorities. I also had the chance to talk to an Albanian guy who told me that he actually lived much better when Kosovo was integrated into Serbia and Yugoslavia, because now Kosovo is essentially a narco-terrorist entity that is destroying the lives of everyone, not just Serbs and other minorities, but also of Albanians who are actually emigrating in masses. Where? Well, to Western Europe, where they're going to be cheap labor. So the best thing we could do is simply dismantle this narco-terrorist entity that NATO monster, essentially, that NATO created. But in order to do that, we need military power, and this is what NATO is trying to prevent Serbia from acquiring. The Serbian government is trying to rebuild our military, but that's going to, that's a very difficult thing to do, especially now with us being cut off from the rest of the world by NATO and the EU. So I'm not very optimistic for Serbs in Kosovo, but I really hope that we can do something to, to at least prevent further massacres and the destruction of whatever is left of the Serbian community there.
Thank you,
Thank
Drago.
you.
Alex, did you have a thought on that as well? Or?
Well, it's I think we're getting a little bit time is we have another.
Yes,
I think we want to have to end, but first of all, I want to mention again and to show this, and maybe Alex will be, I don't know if he already read this book, but this book, which has like 690 pages, I'm still kind of in the middle, and the author of this book, Scott Horton, will be our speaker in 2 weeks. So I really urge you to, I see that might put showing, some people showing and Scott is great. He is the head of the Libertarian Institute. Someone mentioned that America was supposed to be a libertarian state, and he is head of the Libertarian Institute. It will be interesting to hear him. And in terms of assassination of Putin, Tucker Carlson, I don't think he just imagined something. He has some sources, and he definitely knows that there was some work in the planning. And maybe it's good that he said this, that he disclosed this horrible story. Otherwise, God knows what was going to happen if they would succeed. And finally, remember, we will all talk about young people, that we should really get effort. And I'm pleased to say that we made a little breakthrough in my American University in Washington, D.C., which I used to teach math and physics. And Peter Kuznick, who is still a professor at history, he allowed me to speak, to make a presentation to his students. I will be doing this on Monday. So this is something I encourage all of those participants here who have access to universities to see if we can get some young people involved as well, because it's extremely important. And this was our goal from the beginning. Okay, well, so Matt, it's just we're about to end, right? Just
yeah, no, that's great, Ed. Thank you. And I absolutely, let's always have it in the back of your mind whenever there's young people in your family that are asking questions, that have a little kindling that you could see inside of them to try to figure out what's really going on. Try to encourage them to come down to these roundtable discussions and take part in these lessons that you're not going to get anywhere else. And I'm really happy that Peter Kuznick opened the door for you to introduce some of these bigger ideas as well to his class. So that's fantastic. So yeah, looking forward to next February 16th. Again, Scott Horton, main presenter, will be opening for questions after his main presentation. Hope to see everybody there, and have a great week. Thank you.